I never imagined that sending flowers could result in anything more than a brief thank you. If I was lucky, a tip. Everything changed the day I moved into that 52nd floor penthouse apartment. It was pouring heavily outside. I was soaked, exhausted, and irritated because of the chilly rain that seeps beneath your jacket, no matter how tightly you wrap it. To go all the way up for a single bouquet, Celeste Moreau, the order's name. Everyone had a tech mogul, of course, and I had heard of the richest woman in the city. I would never have met this investor socialite beauty, but to me, she was simply another headline. Real life, let alone talk to. The elevator opened straight into her penthouse, and I stood there without a doorbell or hallway, holding a vase of deep red roses that matched the color of her immaculate marble floor, and pouring water all over it like a fool, color of the walls. And then she showed there barefoot, holding a glass of red wine in a champagne-colored silk robe. She replied in a low voice, "You must be my delivery girl," with a hand and a sneer that could defeat the strongest woman alive. And velvety smooth, "You look like you've had a long day." I forced myself to look away because she was so beautiful. I held out hope that she would be adored since she had dark waves of hair, pale skin, and prominent cheekbones. He said, "Yeah, these are for you." She received the flowers, but she didn't. She looked at me as if she was attempting to commit every feature of my face to memory. "I apologize. Perhaps I ordered these for you instead of for myself." My heart skipped a beat as I looked at her in confusion, wondering what she was doing with the flowers. "You deliver here a lot, don't you?" I've moved closer, brushing the hem of her robe against her thighs as I approached a side table. "I hadn't seen you before, and when I asked the store who you were, my ears turned red. To get attention, certainly not from someone like her. I lived and worked odd jobs. She lived in a little studio in a section of town where the lights flickered more often than they remained on, and she could see from her living room. "I'm Riley," and I tried to sound calm and normal throughout the entire city. Celeste tilted her head and added, "Sane, I deliver for Bellum, just part-time." "Riley," she grinned and asked, "would you like to dry?" As if she were tasting it like a secret. I hesitated. "Are you rushing to return to work?" Every aspect of me was yelling to flee, not because I was afraid, but rather because I didn't comprehend what was going on. Rich, attractive ladies didn't, even though I'm not into flirting with flower girls. I had to say, "I suppose I could wait a moment." She silently handed me her wine glass and disappeared into what I thought was the kitchen. Tried to determine whether I was dreaming or just losing it as I stood there in shock, holding her drink. She came back a few seconds later with a towel in one of her robes. "If you continue to stand there like that, you'll get a cold." I don't know why, but I took the robe in my hands and went to the restrooms on the left side of the hallway. Perhaps it was the way she gazed at me. It wasn't as though I was just a girl living payment to paycheck and doing too many jobs. When I returned, I felt as though I was important and that she already knew she wanted me. She was sitting on the couch with her legs crossed and playing idly while covered in silk that smelt like her scent. "I don't usually do this," I added, softening my voice, holding the stem of her wine glass. "Neither do I," she said. "But something about you," her gaze locked with mine. Once more, and I swear that for a brief while, the outer world stopped spinning. That evening, I didn't even return to work. I checked my phone and sat with her till the rain subsided into a soft mist, and the city lights went out. We didn't share a kiss, didn't touch, but as I eventually stood up, I could feel the tension between us growing stronger. She led me to the elevator as I was getting ready to go, and I meant what I said. She moved her lips closer to my ear and said, "I want you in my bed, here in my life, but only when you're ready." And then the doors suddenly closed. That night, I was unable to sleep, so I stayed in bed and stared at the robe she gave me was still draped over the back of a chair, and the smell of her perfume filled the ceiling of my small apartment. In some way, the silence made everything seem more genuine, as if I had entered a movie, as if I had dreamed it all, but her speech continued to reverberate in my ears. "I want you to be a part of my life," and nobody had ever talked to me like that in my bed before. Not with assurance, not with desire, without hesitation. I woke up the following morning with a pain in my chest and 100 ideas racing through my mind. I decided not to return to the flower shop because I needed to take a breath and consider. I stopped at a cafe after walking for miles amid the commotion of traffic in the early morning sun, dancing on damp pavements. Bought the cheapest item on the menu since I couldn't afford it. But I couldn't stop thinking about Celeste Moreau. Not only was she wealthy, but she was also barefoot in silk, giving me a robe as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The way she walked as like she controlled the city, her penthouse, and everyone's attention, and somehow she gave me hers. By the afternoon, I received a message from an unidentified person on my phone. "I hope you are well. I would love to see you again." I gazed at the number. I hovered my thumb over the screen for a long time, unsure of how to play this. Wasn't accustomed to ladies like her. My previous relationship had ended badly due to infidelity, deception, and other emotional turmoil. Celeste was different, or perhaps she wasn't. Perhaps I was simply falling too quickly. I had vowed never to enter into her again. I responded that I didn't, even if I was simply another gorgeous item to a lovely woman who enjoyed pretty things. Feel ill, a little terrified, and puzzled. A minute later, good, it implies this. Isn't dull. I didn't anticipate hearing from her again that day. But it was 6:00 me, right as the sun was going down. She also texted, dinner tonight, dress comfortably, and I'll send a car. I debated for several minutes in front of my closet before finally saying no. I gave up and put on the same boots I wore to work, black pants, and a dark top. The car was waiting when I went outside. The doorman grinned at me as I got to her building, as if he had already been informed who I was. This time, the elevator ride felt shorter, and as the doors to her realm, Celeste, opened again, I felt sick to my stomach, had the same grin that made my knees weaken, and greeted me with 2 glasses of wine. I ordered Thai, she added. You're not wrong, I said, taking the wine in my hand. You seem like someone who wants tiny portions and 12 forks. As her fingers touched hers, the tension returned, growing heavier as it was becoming into something that none of us could stop. With the city lights gleaming, we ate on the couch while cuddled up with blankets. She informed me about her business and how she made her wealth from a coding startup through her enormous windows. Before one concept eventually worked after a dozen fruitless efforts, I told her about my mom's 3 jobs and how she never remaining anywhere long enough to feel like I belonged. And in between jasmine rice and spring rolls, you feel genuine? She whispered quietly as she stretched out and grabbed my palm. I'm surrounded by individuals who are trying to get something from me. Yet you're simply here. I met her eyes and said, I don't want anything from you, not even myself. She leaned down and said, my heart flipped. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Her lips initially touched mine softly, warmly, and uncertainly, allowing me time to pull away. However, it became deeper as I kissed her back, like if we had been holding something delicate in our hands. And now it was breathless. She retreated at first, saying, you're dangerous. I can already tell, chuckling quietly. Why I stayed because I wanted to keep you longer than I had anticipated that evening. And after wine and food, we found ourselves on the balcony. With my hair tangled in the wind, Celeste was standing behind me, her arms loosely around my waist, her chin resting as the city lights shimmered below us, on my shoulder as if we had been friends for years. She didn't say much, and to be honest, she didn't need to. Her gentle fingerplay on the hem of my shirt seemed to have a relaxing effect, as if she were recalling the sensation I never imagined closeness could resemble stillness. But it did in that instant, and it was lovely. I didn't anticipate vulnerability in her eyes when I finally turned to face her. She gave me a glance that wasn't like, you don't know how, but a woman who owned half the city was terrified of losing something she hadn't even yet acquired. She whispered, it's dangerous that it's letting you this close. I grinned, She put her fingers to her jaw and said, you're the one who invited me in. She bent down and gave me another, slower kiss. Her breath caught as our lips parted. I don't do this. I don't let people stay. I was at a loss for words, so I simply kissed her once more, and we ended up entangled on the couch, putting her palm over my heart as if she wanted confirmation that I was real, but not doing anything else when she finally dozed off with her head resting on my shoulder, and I simply observed her, learning every freckle and delicate contour by heart, pout her lips, and the small fluttering of her eyelashes throughout her dream. She was not Celeste Moreau at that precise moment. I was afraid of this tech queen and media darling because she was just a woman who wanted to be noticed and possibly even loved. Above all, I left early in the morning, not wanting to disturb her, and wrote a letter on the back of it. Thank you for the genuine receipt from my jacket last night. I left it next to her, half-full wine glass. The elevator descent felt more taxing than initially, as if I were leaving something behind that I wasn't sure I'd find again when I left. The streets were still. Only the early hum of traffic and the occasional horn made the world feel colder, and I detested how fast I missed her. The days that followed were unclear because neither she nor I texted. Perhaps she regretted it. I considered it 100 times and even typed out a note once before deleting it. Rich people surely have whims like that, falling in love for a night and then moving on. Perhaps I had just been a distraction. I attempted to return to work as if nothing had occurred, but every flower I touched seemed as if it didn't matter, brought to mind the one she got me. Each fragrance had a part of her. Then, on Friday night, as I was strolling, returning from the store, drenched from the rain once more, and without an umbrella, her black, sleek, and gleaming automobile drove up next to me. Despite the dismal skies, she was wearing sunglasses as the back window slid down in the rain. Get in, she replied, her lips slightly apart, as if she had been looking for the proper words but had never found them. I didn't inquire as to why, I simply did so. The car's door closed behind me, and the warmth of its embrace enveloped me like her arms had for days. I've been thinking of you every day since the minute I sat down till she grasped my hand. I tried to dismiss it, thinking that perhaps I was being foolish in my haste. But damn day, she stated, into anything merely because it was novel and thrilling. But the reality is that I feel more than simply a connection with you. I can't describe it, and I don't want to act like it doesn't exist. I was astounded by how unguarded she was acting when I glanced at her. She was showing me a lot of herself. So I gripped her rain-soaked palm and said, "Then don't pretend." She smiled and then grinned broadly as she said, "Let's find out what this is." In the backseat of her fancy car, with the city speeding by, something in her chest finally unlocked. We shared another, deeper kiss in the midst of the storm outside, as if we were both prepared for whatever it was that this car would become. Didn't return to her penthouse this time. Instead, she showed me a peaceful home hidden away outside the city, behind whispering trees and iron gates, in an area that seemed more appropriate for a magazine than for real life. She claimed that she came here to get away from the cacophony, the cameras, and the ongoing stress of being Celeste. Moreau's house had no polished marble, no humming phones, and no employees, windows that allowed in the type of light that made the wood floors, plush couches, candles she actually lighted herself. And everything seemed a bit softer when I entered, still drenched from the rain, and felt her hand guiding me on my back. She said, "I haven't brought anyone here in years," as she moved softly down the hallway, as if to show me a piece of herself. Not since I lost faith in my ability to trust someone enough to inquire about what had transpired. I simply knew that allowing me to enter this area meant something to her. Gave me a towel, a change of clothes, a pair of leggings, and an old, soft, oversized hoodie that strangely fit wonderfully. She was in the kitchen, barefoot once more, with her hair tied up and singing. When I returned downstairs, "This is the real me," she said to herself as she poured tea. It was so normal, so painfully human, I almost forgot who she was. When she saw me staring, she remarked, "That woman wears designer gowns, but it's not the version they see on magazine covers, and tells falsehoods to close transactions." But this time she gave me a cup, fingers grazing mine once more. This is the woman who simply wants a companion to read with her on Sunday mornings. I sat with her on the rug in front of the fireplace, and we conversed in silence as the warmth of the flames kissed our skin. Hours discussing simple things that made us laugh, what worried us, and what types of dreams we had, not only about job or the world. I told her about the first time I fell in love, and how it ended because life had made us question ourselves. She told me of the girl she once gave everything to who took her, leaving a hole in betrayal that I never fully filled. After everything fell apart, she stated, staring into the fire, "I've lost money, her trust, and almost ruined her in the press. Constructed walls that are so tall that I can get lost inside them. But it's different with you." Later that evening, when I was at a loss for words, I leaned on her shoulder and let the silence to return to us. She took my hand and escorted me upstairs when the tea became cold and the fireplace went down. Not because she was hungry or desperation, yet with compassion. Her bedroom was cozy, filled with blankets and books, and it was nothing like the sharp contemporary lines of her penthouse. She drew me into bed with her and encircled me as though she had been. We didn't rush anything. We didn't need to wait years to sleep next to someone who wouldn't lie to her. We simply slept with our bodies intertwined, breathing in and out, gradually regaining trust. I recall waking up to discover her observing me in the dark, her fingertips delicately following the contour of my face. In the middle of the night, I was partly asleep when she asked, "Do you believe in soul connections?" Still, the question resonated deeply within me. "I didn't," I whispered. "But I believe I do now," because she gave me a slow, deep kiss, and I swear something changed inside of us both. Something old and worn out fell apart, and something new began to emerge. Something beautiful and horrifying. I dreamed of her hand in mine when I went back to sleep, and I didn't feel lost for the first time in years. The following morning, sunshine poured into the room like if it were a godsend. Celeste seemed so calm and gentle, nothing like the furious, and I watched her sleep for a while, woman the world saw in glossy pictures and interviews. She had untidy hair, slightly parted lips, and one arm draped over my waist as if she had claimed me in her fantasies, and I was unwilling to move or disturb the magic that was there, that peaceful area between us. But she opened her eyes and began blinking away the brightness. Her first action was I was worried that it might feel different in the morning, but she smiled at me as if I were the greatest thing she had ever woken up to. Her voice was still heavy with sleep as she muttered, "But it doesn't, it feels better." We remained together as I returned her grin and brushed her hair away from her cheek. Yeah, it really does. Like way for a long time. Encircling one another and letting our hands wander idly over our flesh without saying anything. Seeking intimacy, warmth, and connection rather than passion. After a while, we went downstairs and she prepared coffee. I watched her go through her kitchen as if she belonged there, fierce and bitter just the way she loved it. The outer world seemed to vanish, and all that mattered was me sitting at her counter and drinking from her mug while wearing her hoodie, and I felt secure for the first time in a long time. As if I might not need to run anymore. She sat. What if we just stayed here, forgetting the world? Just you and me in this, she asked, her legs bouncing like a child's. I chuckled, but there was a genuineness to her words. Something unfiltered that you had not seen in the previous 2 days. I responded, "You're not built for hiding," and she raised an eyebrow. "You got bored?" "Maybe not, but I'm tired of pretending I don't want more. And I think you might be the more I've been looking for." This surprised me because when I looked at her, I saw only honesty and no manipulation or trickery. I was still afraid that I would never be someone's more, but I had always been someone's for the time being, someone practical, till things become complex. And I wanted to matter, rather than just her getaway or her recovery. "Are you certain?" I asked. "I have baggage, I'm broke, and I have issues." She got up, walked up to me, and cradled my face with both hands. "But I don't shine the way your world expects people to. I want someone who stays, not someone who shines. And I have enough money for us to quit acting like we're together." The day went so slowly, as if time had relaxed. And we dined together and danced barefoot in the reading excerpts from our favorite books aloud while listening to vintage French music on vinyl in the living room. It was easy and ideal, precisely what I didn't realize I needed that night. We watched from a garden stool in the garden while wrapped in a single blanket. She turned to face me as the sky turned to darkness and whispered, "If I told you I loved you, would you be afraid of that?" My breath caught, and I was at a loss for words. A week hadn't even passed, but it didn't feel incorrect. It felt as though we had spent 1,000 peaceful lifetimes together, not hurried. "Yes," I said honestly over those few days, but not in a negative sense, simply in the way she rested her head on my shoulder and said, "I know I could love you back if I'm not careful. Don't be careful. Just be with me." At that moment, I silently vowed to be that no matter what, something I couldn't yet say aloud. I wouldn't flee because of love, no matter how loud the world got when it learned about us. Real love didn't arrive at the ideal moment. Instead, it arrived with unvarnished honesty, restless nights, unexpected flowers, and we chose not to return to the city because of a woman who loved you as if it were the only thing she would ever trade for all her fortune. Celeste immediately put everything on hold, including meetings, investor calls, and interviews, and remained concealed with me in that tiny house as if time had stopped for us alone. We had a leisurely life as if nothing else existed. She prepared more than I ever did, and I was expecting anything like we owed no one an explanation. I called her and taunted her because I thought a millionaire would frequently burn the edges of items and blame the stove. It was unreal when she would giggle and chase me about the kitchen while barefoot and carefree. Using a wooden spoon, she wasn't the same woman who used to appear on magazine covers wearing high heels at moments like this. Yet as she glanced at me, there was no question that this was the case. When she touched me and softly confessed to me late at night, she revealed to me the scar on her ribs from a procedure she had years prior, which she had concealed even while she told me about her father, who left her and her mother when she was 8 years old. She acknowledged that I listened, afraid that she would become so unreachable that no one would ever adore her without a price tag. Hugged her. I kissed the areas that hurt, even if they weren't visible, and I told her about my early years in claustrophobic apartments, nights when you only had a bag of chips for dinner, and dreams you disregarded because I told her about how I nearly gave up on love because I was so sure it wasn't intended for people. It hurt too much. She never put me against those who love me too intensely, too quickly, or too raw. She simply saw me and attempted to cure me, and being seen in that way we sat on the floor one night with our backs against the bed, and it was the most beautiful and terrible feeling I had ever had. With the storm raging outside and the wine in our hands, she turned to face me and asked, "Do you think this could last?" I didn't know how to respond at first. Not because I didn't want to, but rather because I had never experienced fear, failing if we protect it. I replied, "If we fight for it, then yeah, maybe it could." The calm didn't last long, though, as on the 5th she leaned in to kiss my cheek and said, "Then let's fight." The outside world had seen her when her phone began to ring once more that day. There was a call, then another, and then dozens. Absence, and conversation was beginning. Her assistant wrote that the media was investigating after someone had noticed her automobile outside the flower shop 2 weeks ago. A tabloid published a picture of me leaving her building. When she read the news, her jaw tightened, and I could see the change in her face as rumors began to circulate. She added, "They're going to distort this," and her eyes darkened not with guilt, but with tiredness. They'll picture you as I became tired of gold diggers and working class fantasies, and they'll try to make me look bad. I grasped her hand and murmured, "Let them go." After remaining silent and allowing her to spiral, "Talk. I'm not embarrassed of you." She gave me a look that was a mix of pride and embarrassment, and fear, but I'm embarrassed by them for transforming love into a scandal. There was a storm outside and another one building inside, so we slept in one other's arms that night without saying much. Us, the sort that you can sense approaching before the thunder even claps. But in spite of all, I have no regrets. The following morning, she informed me that I would have preferred to have loved her completely, and momentarily over never touching her at all. Had to go back to the city to face whatever came up, not to flee or hide. "We do this on our terms. No secrets. No shame," she continued. "Are you ready?" Sincerely. I wasn't sure if I was afraid of it, but I nodded nevertheless, since this kind of love wasn't something you hid behind fear. Rather, you stood up for it, even at your own expense. Everything. And we silently made our way back to the city, her hand clutching mine the whole time as if she were afraid. Vanished as soon as we entered her world again, and I could sense her as the window's skyline became wider. Energy shift. Her face sharpened like armor, gradually locking back into place. Her stance straightened, and by the time when she arrived at her apartment, she was once again Celeste Moreau, the lady the city both feared and admired. However, I could still see remnants of the previous iteration of her, the one who kissed me with unwavering honesty and poured tea barefoot. The air felt thicker and colder when I entered her flat, as if it remembered the walls we had both ripped down the previous time they've scheduled you for a last-minute interview, her assistant said, pacing anxiously inside as we arrived. "They're pushing inquiries about the girl about Riley," she murmured without greeting. Tonight, the word girl hung. Celeste did not recoil as the accusation hung in the air. "Then I'll answer them," she said. "To be honest." I looked at her and wasn't sure what truth she was trying to convey. She remarked simply. She didn't ask for my consent, and perhaps she didn't have to, but I still shuddered in part because I was afraid of being. She instructed me to remain inside while she was exposed, dissected, and thrust into a spotlight that was never intended for me. "It's better if you're not there," she replied gently, handling the interview alone. "They'll attempt to bait you," and I agreed. But I had the uneasy feeling that they were going to misrepresent what you said. Hours later, my heart was racing as I watched the live video from her couch, slowly unraveling. The host was slick and, while searching for blood, grinning and seeming interested. "There are rumors that you have been romantically involved with someone, long way beyond your typical circle," he added. "Want to elaborate?" Celeste glanced. "Her name is Riley, and she works as a florist. She's kind," she remarked straight into the camera. "She's the first genuine thing I've had in years. Honest, and unconcerned about my finances." After a moment of apparent surprise, she continued, "And yes, we're together." Ought to have been a triumph, a proclamation, a moment of success. But the backlash began almost immediately on social media. People tore me apart based on my appearance, with half of the remarks being encouraging and the other half being nasty. Background of my work. They accused me of using her and seducing her, and they called me names I hadn't heard since high school, damaging her reputation. Reporters set up camp outside my flat, and some attempted to follow me to work. Celeste offered to give me money to quit the flower business because the owner claimed that the attention was driving away consumers. Employ me a lawyer or a public relations manager, but I didn't want her to make things right. I simply wanted it to stop. We spent days locked in her glass tower, trying to cling to what little we had left while watching the world rage. What we had, but it wasn't simple. The strain began to strain our relationship, and she had to return to work in order to. She left me wandering her penthouse like a ghost whenever she departed for meetings or festivities, and I began to feel like a shadow rather than a companion. One evening following yet another exhausting day apart, when she got home, I was crying and staring out the window. "I don't know if I can survive your world," I said, whispered. "I thought I could, but I don't know anymore." She quickly walked across the room and embraced me. She muttered, "Then let's leave it," so tightly that I could hardly breathe. "Let it all burn. I don't care about any of it. Simply stay with me." But I knew it wasn't that easy. Love was always about survival, not just passion. And we didn't sleep that night since we were both bleeding in separate ways. Instead, we just clutched each other in the dark out of fear for what. The dawn arrived gradually, bringing gray light through the windows, like a silent reminder that I hadn't slept and she hadn't either. We simply laid there, clutching to the. I sensed the question lingering between us, the one we both been avoiding, and I felt as though quiet could keep us together. I sat up, wondering if love could truly be enough when the outside world seemed designed to destroy something similar to us. She reached for me despite my tightening the blanket about me, out of fear that I would shatter if I stared at her for too long, her fingers softly encircling my wrist. grounding me, allowing me to let go of everything. Softer this time, she continued. I've developed enough to walk away. We can go somewhere where no one knows us, and there are no headlines. Riley, if you say the word, I'll disappear with you. No cameras, just you and me. She meant it, and I could see it in her. I was divided between the life I had always desired and the lady I had found it with. Eyes I didn't want her to flee, but she would burn down her empire for me. Desire to be the reason she sacrificed everything she had worked so hard to build. And I wanted to be by her side, not in her shadow, but in her world as I see fit. I don't want to vanish, I said. I want to make a difference. Want to fight? But only if you let me to do it, rather than merely duck behind you. She grinned, and then a broken, lovely kind. Then we fight, she added, with a smile that conveys both relief and fear. As a result, we stopped concealing and conducted interviews together, speaking candidly regarding our relationship, the pressure, the hatred of beauty, and the fact that I fell in love with someone I didn't anticipate. With her help, but without her name, I opened my own floral shop because I was determined to make something that was uniquely mine. Still conversed, and some people continued to pass judgment. But gradually they grew weary and moved on, as the world always does, and we started living in the silence that was left behind. We danced in our kitchen with the windows open during lengthy car journeys without phones. As we grew older, I continued to make fun of her for burning breakfast half the time. Though not much changed in the world, we did learn to pick one another, repeatedly, even during difficult times, particularly throughout difficult years and days. Later, she reached for my hand as we sat across from each other in the same tiny house where we first said I love you. Do you still want to stay? She questioned, her eyes still full of that spark. And I never even thought twice, because when I assumed it would only be for one night, but the wealthiest woman in the city truly wanted me in her bed. We both needed someone who would put love before fear, loudness, and doubt, and I did just that every day.